So, as you know, I'm very interested in the APOE4 mutation, sometimes called the Alzheimer's gene. And, 30% of people actually carry that either one or two mutations. Luckily, most people carry one of the mutations. But a lot of people go, well, number one, I don't want to know if I carry that mutation because there's nothing I can do about it. And number two, well, now that I know I have that mutation, there's nothing I can do about it. So what say you?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the APOE4 allele, as you mentioned, very common, increases one's risk for developing Alzheimer's disease anywhere between 2 and 14-fold. But it's not a determinant gene. It's a risk gene. So whether or not somebody develops Alzheimer's disease is ultimately determined by their environment, the dance that their environment plays with that genetic risk factor. You can look to other parts of the world where the APOE4 allele is just as prevalent, and the APOE4 carrying population has little to no risk of developing dementia there.
Correct.
What that suggests is you might be genetically at risk for Alzheimer's disease in the United States and then move to a less industrialized part of the world, like in Ibadan, Nigeria, for example, and see that risk completely abolished. So again, it's not a determinant gene. A very small percentage of patients with Alzheimer's disease carry one type of a determinant gene called early onset familial Alzheimer's disease, but that's very rare. That makes up 2 to 3% of Alzheimer's cases. The vast majority will develop late onset sporadic Alzheimer's disease. And for that condition, yes, we absolutely do have a say. I think that, and also it's worth mentioning that there are genes that people have that have yet to be discovered that might cancel out the impact of the APOE4 allele. This is called polygenic risk. So, you have a smorgasbord of genes baked into every cell in your body. And yes, the APOE4 allele exists. It's the most well-defined Alzheimer's risk gene, but it's not the only Alzheimer's risk gene. And there are genes that substantially modulate the impact that the APOE4 allele has on your health. With regard to the APOE4 allele, I think that one of the major issues that it seems to cause is that it puts us at risk for vascular dysfunction. And one of the purported mechanisms by which it increases our risk is by putting carriers at risk for hyperlipidemia, so like hypercholesterolemia, for example. I actually think that this is a great insight. If it holds true, because we know we have ways of ensuring that people that carry this gene their bodies are better able to manage lipids. Dietary fiber, for example, helps to improve the liver's ability to recycle LDL cholesterol. We were talking, Dr. Gundry, when you were on my podcast recently, about how they found that coffee has an ingredient in it, has a compound in it called caffeine, which actually acts like a natural PCSK9 inhibitor. PCSK9 inhibitors, there's a new class of cholesterol-lowering drug on the market called PCSK9 inhibitors that basically the way in which they reduce cholesterol in the blood is not by stopping your liver's synthesis of cholesterol, which is actually, we need cholesterol. Cholesterol is a vital life-giving nutrient, right? Found in every cell membrane. And that's the way that statins work. Statins block the liver, stop the liver from producing cholesterol. But this new class of drugs, I think, is actually can be quite helpful in the sense that they improve the efficiency and the efficacy of your liver at plucking up these remnant LDL particles from your blood.
Right.
And how amazing is it that coffee, that green tea, that dark chocolate all have this natural compound in it called caffeine, which acts like a natural PCSK9 inhibitor.
Yeah, and as you and I know, there are multiple studies looking at the benefits of drinking like up to 5 cups of coffee a day in brain health and protecting your brain.
Yeah, it's so true. I mean, coffee is a great source of, and it's the primary source, unfortunately for most Americans, of polyphenols, which you talk about all the time. We know that polyphenols support gut health. We know that they act as a prebiotic source for the colonic microbiota to ferment and churn out postbiotics, which can be very helpful from the standpoint of modulating inflammation in the body. And yes, observationally, we see that people who drink more coffee have a degree of protection against Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's disease, multiple sclerosis, and also cardiovascular disease. So this new study gives us a potential mechanism, right? Which I think is so powerful.
Yeah, the exciting thing, particularly about the microbiome, is that really every day we find a reason why genius foods are having a genius effect, and a lot of it is modulated by the microbiome. And you spend a lot of time in the book, talking about how important that these genius foods are for our gut bacteria to actually benefit directly and make all these other products that are really going to manifest in better brain health and in better mood, better mental health. And I applaud you for pointing out in the book that this isn't just about your thinking process and how your brain processes information. It's about literally how your brain emotional processes work. You want to spend a little time talking about that? Was that a surprise to you? I know you came at this to prevent brain decline, but go ahead.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Actually, yeah, it was a surprise, and it was a major motivating factor to write my books, because I started out really passionate about dementia prevention, right? And I realized that dementia begins in the brain often decades before the first symptoms. So this was a topic that I felt people of all ages needed to be thinking about, their brain health, right? And the choices that they make day to day and how those choices can inform the way that their brains work. But there was a point at which I felt I had reached a conundrum, because I knew, being a younger person, that young people didn't care about dementia, right? So I knew that if I wrote the dementia prevention book, that I wasn't actually going to move the needle on this condition, that I wasn't actually going to further my goal of actually helping people prevent their own dementia, because younger people weren't going to buy it if I wrote the dementia prevention book. So I kept researching, and I stayed open-minded, and I stumbled upon this burgeoning field of psychiatry being called nutritional psychiatry. And nutritional psychiatry, we're just really at the tip of the iceberg, but we are seeing now, thanks to a slew of randomized control trials that have come out, the kinds of trials required to prove cause and effect, that have used food as an intervention with major mood disorders. I mean, imagine that. For decades, you'd go to your psychiatrist and you'd present with a dour mood, and they'd write a prescription for a pharmaceutical monotherapy, right? A drug that you would take that would attempt to modulate levels of a certain neurotransmitter in your brain. But now, thanks to places like Deakin University, the Food and Mood Center there, led by Felice Jacka, who's a wonderful PhD who's spearheading a lot of this work, we see that a dietary pattern akin to the kind of diet that I describe in Genius Foods and in Genius Kitchen can actually significantly reduce symptoms of depression, even in people with major depression, to the point of remission. Whereas the control group that received standard of care didn't have such success. So when I stumbled upon that kind of work, I was like, okay, this is my Trojan horse. This is something that everybody wants. Everybody wants a better performing brain. Everybody wants a brain that works as well as it ought to, not merely as well as we've come to accept, right? But a brain that really lives up to our birthright. And so I started to go down that rabbit hole, and I realized that the same compounds that are present in these foods that support optimal brain health also support good mental health, whether it's zinc, vitamin B12, preformed omega-3 fatty acids, creatine, which is a carnin nutrient found naturally in fish and beef, supports brain energy metabolism. So for people who feel like they don't have enough energy throughout the day, it could be due to the fact that they're just not getting enough of this nutrient in their food. A wonderful source of dietary protein. Our brain thrives when our body moves. And protein is, I know you talk a lot about protein in the context of longevity, but from the standpoint of mobility, of muscle health, having high quality protein in your diet is really quite important. And so, and also in light of all of the research showing just how important exercise is from the standpoint of mental health, right? Like exercise is now medicine for the brain. We can say that with certainty with regard to our mental health. We can say that with certainty with regard to our predisposition to cognitive decline. Exercise can now significantly help prevent a condition called mild cognitive impairment, which is pre-dementia. It also is as effective as drugs at reducing blood pressure. One of the pivotal studies in the field of dementia prevention, a seminal study that was published recently, was called the SPRINT Mind Trial, that found that for people that were at risk for developing mild cognitive impairment and who had hypertension, when pharmacologically treated for their hypertension, they saw a significant risk reduction for the development of mild cognitive impairment, which again is pre-dementia. So people who had high blood pressure, we know that high blood pressure is a risk factor for dementia. When treated with a pharmaceutical agent, they slashed their risk for developing cognitive impairment. We now know that exercise is just as effective at reducing high blood pressure and without any negative side effects.